about 10 kilometres from the crash site. He photographed the hot air balloon as it went past on what he described as a clear day without almost any wind.
It doesn't compute, no. It's, you would think it just seemed like a normal flight and then coming down into land.
Garth Dawson says it doesn't make sense to him how everything went so wrong after the hot air balloon went out of sight. A man has been sentenced to life in prison for murdering his young son in February last year. 25-year-old William James Seo appeared in the High Court at Rotorua this morning after previously admitting 5 charges, including the assault, neglect and murder of Pharaoh James Seo. Pharaoh James was 5 years old when he died following neglect and physical abuse at the hands of his father. William James Seo was sentenced to life imprisonment and will serve 17 years before being eligible for parole. The police say the child was killed by the very person who was meant to care for and protect him. The business owner who championed the 4-day working week in New Zealand says the country lags behind the rest of the world when it comes to adopting the change. A number of countries are passing legislation to allow companies to easily opt into a 4-day working week when employees work 32 hours but are paid for the full 40. Perpetual Guardian was the first company to trial this in 2018 and has been doing it ever since, citing increased productivity and happier employees. Its founder, Andrew Barnes, says he is frustrated not many New Zealand businesses have trialled a 4-day week.
It is one of the frustrations that 3 years on, New Zealand employment legislation and Holidays Act legislation actually penalises companies attempting to implement the 4-day week.
Andrew Barnes has started a campaign asking companies around the world to sign up to a large-scale pilot, which begins next year. It's 4 minutes past 5. Hopes tomorrow night's test between the All Blacks and Fiji will be a little more competitive than the 100-point romp the All Blacks enjoyed against Tonga last weekend have dimmed. It's 10 years since the All Blacks and Fiji last played, but Fiji coach Vern Cotter has revealed their build-up has been just as difficult as Tonga's was, with 3 of his top players stuck in Australia.
A lot of the players have come from Europe, so the managed isolation was a challenge in itself, and the disappointing thing is not being able to get 3 players out of Australia, with the Trans-Tasman bubble being blocked.
Crusaders coach Scott Robertson has re-signed until the end of the 2024 Super Rugby season. However, he does have the option to cut the contract short by a year if he doesn't get the All Blacks coaching job post the 2023 World Cup. New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker has reportedly contracted COVID-19 while in training with world heavyweight champion Tyson Fury in Las Vegas. Parker has been in Las Vegas to help Fury prepare for his title fight against American Deontay Wilder. ESPN is reporting Fury has also contracted coronavirus and the fight has been postponed until October. US boxing journalist Dan Rafael initially reported that Parker, the former WBO world heavyweight champion, was among several of Fury's camp to test positive. The Phoenix Suns have gone 2-0 up in the NBA Finals with a 118-108 win over the Milwaukee Bucks in Game 2. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the CEO who slashed his salary to pay the workers more. How's that going for him 6 years on? Australia's singer-songwriter Courtney Barnett with the first single from a new album. And Jason Ferguson on the documentary he's made about his legendary father, Sir Alex. Paul Kim Hillaho, join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northlands to Whanganui, including Coromandel and Central High Country. Fine spells, a few showers, especially in the west. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Also Manawatu to Kapiti Coast. Fine weather. Wellington and Wairarapa, fine. However, a few showers tomorrow morning. For Bulla, showers becoming isolated tomorrow morning. Westland, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine weather. Showers for Westland, north of the glaciers, and isolated showers about the Kaikoura coast tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Clutha. Widespread showers, isolated for north and central Otago. Snow lowering to 200 metres in the south this evening. Southwesterly gales about the coast. And Chatham Islands, periods of rain or showers. Hail is also possible. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, Kiwis wanting to get out of COVID-hit New South Wales face further uncertainty and 2 weeks in MIQ. But first, multiple investigations are underway after a hot air balloon crash landed at a farm near Arrowtown. 11 people were injured, 2 of them seriously. The company involved, Sunrise Balloons, has temporarily suspended all commercial flights following the accident and expressed deep upset at what's happened. It says the balloon was being flown by an experienced pilot and had been in the air for about an hour when it came into land at a private airstrip on Morven Ferry Road and apparently got caught by a sudden gust of wind, sending it off kilter. It came to a stop on Philip Bunn's land.
As I understand it, he was coming in to land and a gust of wind picked them up and just carried them away, and then they bounced across the paddock.
And so what was in their path and where has the balloon ended up?
They bounced for probably a couple of 100 metres across the paddock, and that was clear open space. And then they went through what stopped them. They went through a deer fence and ended up in a tree right in front of the house.
Who was home at the time?
One of my sisters, 2 of my sisters were at home. One was in the tractor feeding deer, and she witnessed it. And then another sister was in the house at the time, and the first she knew of it was when she heard the people screaming.
And what happened next?
They bounced across the paddock, and the balloon went over the fence or through the fence and ended up on its side, pretty much right in front of the house. And then it was just people running around. They got everybody out of the balloon and into the house, I believe.
And were the people who were in the balloon, were they all conscious?
Yeah, everybody was conscious from what I understand, yes. There was just, from what I saw, just broken injuries, legs, arms, things like that.
So did the balloon collect power lines?
The balloon, when it stopped, it came to the power line that comes from the main power. It was running along parallel to where the power lines run. And then there's a line comes off the main power lines and runs to the house. It's a covered cable. And the balloon itself ended up draped across that line that ran from the main lines to the house.
And so then obviously emergency services have arrived at the scene pretty quickly?
Apparently, yeah. Yep.
So your sister, who was out feeding livestock on the tractor, was she expecting the balloon to come in to land?
She was watching it, thinking that it was going to land fine.
I bet that was a bit of a shock then.
Yeah, she's pretty traumatised.
Philip, do they normally land on your property, these balloon trips, or how does it work?
They often land here, where depending on which way the wind's blowing. But yes, they do often land on the farm. But it's something that happens, 2 or 3 times a month, generally.
Did you know the pilot, or do you know the pilot?
Yeah, we know the pilot quite well.
And how was he?
I believe he's okay. I'm not sure. He was here when I was here, and he walked past as he walked out of the house. I know that when he went away in the ambulance. So he was walking and.
That's
happy, but beyond that, I don't know.
That seems incredibly lucky, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To be able to walk away.
Yeah, and the 2 people that fell out of the balloon are the ones underneath and were pretty serious, I believe.
So what happened there, Philip?
When the balloon first hit, my understanding is they got thrown out of the balloon, out of the basket.
Do you know how close they were to coming into land when they were hit by the gust?
I think they were pretty much at ground level. It comes up over a ridge, and the ground is just rising with a hit. And my understanding is that they were coming in to do that. I mean, a gust it must have, I don't know, I'd only be guessing, but it must have hit the ground and then they've bounced in the balloon. It must have caught it on the corner because the balloon spun around as it hit, I was told.
Philip Bunn speaking there, and that balloon crash landed on his property. Now, in a statement, Sunrise Balloons owner and chief pilot Hugh McClellan says that the company was deeply upset about the incident and the injuries sustained to their staff and guests. 2 people sustained serious injuries and were airlifted to Dunedin Hospital. It says experienced balloon pilot Carrick McClellan was treated at nearby Lakes District Hospital for moderate injuries sustained in the incident. The remaining passengers were assessed at Lakes District Hospital for a range of minor injuries before being released. Now, Sunrise Balloons says we are fully supporting our staff and guests at this difficult time, and we wish all involved a full and speedy recovery. And just an update on those passengers from the Southern DHB. The 2 that were seriously injured are said to be in serious but stable condition. It is 13 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu, mo te whakarongo mai e haere ake nei, Fiji's government tries to force the entire civil service to get vaccinated against COVID. The bubble is deflating and fast. New Zealanders wanting to escape New South Wales will now have to undergo 14 days in managed isolation on their arrival home. The Australian state has recorded another 44 cases of COVID-19 in the community today. 29 of the cases were either fully or partially in the community while infectious. That's led to further tightening of restrictions there. Green flights, which were due to start from tomorrow, have also been delayed for at least another 3 days. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Labour MP Sarah Pallett's wedding at Parliament took an unexpected turn this afternoon when the COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, accidentally called a media conference in front of the wedding procession.
I haven't talked to her about that afterwards, but I wish her well for her wedding.
But Sarah Pallett is not the only one who has had an unwanted change to her plans. Up to 2,500 New Zealanders trapped in New South Wales who were scheduled to fly home from tomorrow have had their flights cancelled. And there will be no replacement flights for at least another 3 days.
They can expect to hear from the airlines within the next 24 hours or so. We'll be working with the airlines to make sure that they can get in touch with their customers to let them know what's happening. If there are processes required, then we'll let them know what they will be.
And when they do get back on New Zealand soil, they'll have to wait even longer before being able to return home.
It does mean for those who are returning home that they'll be doing 14 days in MIQ. It is one of the risks in travelling at the moment.
But not everyone will be able to secure a spot in MIQ, with only 1,000 rooms being made available.
So we will be saying to people who don't have an urgent need to return home, please hold back so that those who do urgently need to return back to New Zealand can do so. We'll be working with the airlines more on the processes around that just over the next 24 hours so that we can give greater guidance to travellers about what to expect.
Chris Hipkins says travellers will not have to pay for their stay in MIQ, and those arriving from other parts of the world who already have MIQ spots will have their bookings honoured. He says today's announcement was a last-minute call.
We do what we can do to avoid situations like this. So I'm sorry that people will find themselves in this situation, but it is certainly preferable to do this than to have COVID-19 cases potentially arriving in New Zealand.
However, green flights from Queensland have got the go-ahead from tomorrow, as the government is confident the COVID situation there is contained.
It is almost 17 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. There's been widespread condemnation of the Fiji government's move to force its entire civil servants to get vaccinated against the coronavirus. This comes amid daily record infections and deaths due to the virus. There's more than 7,000 current cases of the virus, with 46 deaths linked to the outbreak. Christine Revoy has more.
Fiji's public servants have been told they will be sacked if they do not get fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama has announced tough new rules to get people immunised. In a speech, he reiterated that a lockdown wouldn't work, but says people are not doing enough to help counter the virus, especially on getting vaccinated. From Monday, any public servants who have not received at least one dose of the vaccine have to go on leave.
They cannot come back to work until they receive at least the first dose of the vaccine. That must be done by 15 August 2021, after which they may return to work so long as they go on to be fully vaccinated by 1st November 2021. If they do not adhere to these guidelines, they will be dismissed from work.
Mr. Bainimarama says private sector employers must ensure all of their staff have at least one dose of the vaccine by August the 1st. Failure to do so could result in that business being shut down. But employment lawyer Filimoni Vosarongo says the government has opened a new Pandora box of rights issues.
It will bring more anxiety to workers and employees, and workers and employers. Particularly, it's going to bring misery to those who, are now contemplating their belief on not having to be vaccinated. And the chances of having to lose their jobs over their choice.
The leader of Fiji's opposition, Sodelpa Party, Bill Ngavoka, says the government has trampled on the constitution, which protects the rights of every Fijian.
There appears to be no template that the government is following, or no SOP. For us, if we were running the show, we would put a figure to a lockdown. We need to go into a lockdown, but we don't know, no one has told us how much it'll cost. We will take that approach. Lockdown Fiji for whatever day, 14 days or 20 days, and we would know how much it'll cost.
Consultant psychotherapist Selina Kuruleda, who does work for the Health Ministry, says the PM's address took many by surprise.
For many of us, we were shocked because the vaccine has been around for a while. Government themselves told us that it comes down to free choice, comes down to your decision whether to accept a medical treatment or not. So yesterday was like turning that very statement on its head.
Meanwhile, Fijians have taken to social media to air their frustration at the government's decision, with many fearing the public will be next. In the 24 hours to 8 a.m. today, over 7,000 COVID-positive people are in isolation. There have been 48 deaths reported, with 46 of them from this latest outbreak that started in April.
Wanganui school students will be the first in the country to be vaccinated at school from the beginning of next school term. 1,600 students aged 16, along with around 700 teachers, will be offered their first Pfizer vaccines at school from early August. The city's senior students will be immunised before they sit exams, and as Alice Stewart reports, it's hoped the rollout will work as a template for the rest of the country.
We're actually just quite relieved that it's happening in school and that we don't have to pay for it or go outside to other hospitals and stuff to get it done.
Relief from Wanganui Girls College Deputy Head Girl Chloe Bernardi today at news she and her classmates will soon get their first Pfizer vaccines.
Especially as a Year 13, and I know a couple of the other senior year groups are feeling the same, that we're going to go out into the big wide world after school and feel safe enough to travel the world.
Chloe, along with 1,600 Wanganui secondary school students, will be vaccinated from the 9th of August. Their kaiko and kaimahi will also be offered the shot. Deputy Principal of Wanganui City College, Valerie Rudekirk, says education around the vaccine has been key.
We had the DHB come in and talk to a group of staff and kids, the over 16-year-olds, just outlining the process and, giving out pamphlets just with all of the information so they can make an informed choice about whether to get vaccinated or not. One student just said to me this afternoon, "Oh, I'm not getting it done. You've got to have that thing stuck up your nose." And I said, "That's a COVID test, not a COVID vaccination."
Valerie Rudekirk says over 80% of their students are Māori, and they also host a number of high-needs children, making the vaccination rollout even more important.
So we're very aware that our kids are going to be out in the community with lots of vulnerable people, and they need to be looking after them. That's that's the message we're giving, that it's about whanaungatanga. It's not about them, it's about everybody else.
The Whanganui District Health Board's Communicable Disease and School-Based Immunisation Coordinator, Bruce Jones, says the biggest hurdle has been scheduling the rollout for senior students.
Term 3 is very busy for especially secondary schools, and then going into Term 4 is exams and stuff like that. So with the program here in Whanganui, we're looking at getting that finished by hopefully the end of next term so that we can be out of the schools for Term 4.
Bruce Jones says clinics will be set up in schools so that students feel comfortable in their own space.
Some schools have school nurses, and they are great helping with the relationship and building up support for the clinics and things like that. But mainly we'll have a team of public health nurses, and also the District Health Board has a great team of vaccinators, and we'll be working with them as well.
Jodie Bunker is the Executive Officer of a special school in Whanganui, where students today received their second Pfizer vaccine.
It'll be a relief when it's done, because obviously it's been a long time coming. And, you know, there's certainly that lot of uncertainty still kind of going around. So, and I think getting it done has kind of helped with a lot of that uncertainty and just not having to worry about it.
The city's rollout for senior students will provide a template for the 12 to 15-year-old group once MedSafe has approved Pfizer for use on that cohort and more vaccines become available.
So at what age can a child decide for themselves whether to have a COVID jab independent of their parents' wishes? It's a question that could come into sharp focus if the government decides to sign off on Pfizer immunisations for 12 to 15-year-olds following MedSafe's provisional approval. Medical ethics expert Dr Monique Jonas from Auckland University says under 16 can be tricky because it's not just a question of age, but whether the child understands the decision they're making.
You will have seen when you go to the doctors that there's a poster up with your rights, and those are set out in the Health and Disability Code of Consumer Rights. So there's 10 of them, and everyone has those rights, and one of them is the right to make decisions, your own decisions, informed decisions, and give informed consent. And that is not an age-restricted right. So that's where children's claims come to make decisions for themselves. And then the question is, are you competent to exercise that right? And there are a number of different elements of that. So you have to be able to understand the information that is relevant to the decision. You have to be able to hold that information for long enough to make a decision, and then you have to use it in a decision-making process. So you have to be able to reach a decision. And the question is, I suppose, in the context of the vaccines, who will make the call about whether someone under the age of 16 actually exhibits those characteristics?
So in terms of cases we've had in New Zealand, what would be the youngest person that any, I suppose, disciplinary agency or court has decided, yep, they're young, but they knew that what they were deciding regarding medical treatment or vaccination?
Well, there has been a judgment that was reached some time ago in the 2000s by the Health and Disability Commission that a 14-year-old was able to make their own decision about a vaccination. And so that was in the context of a child receiving a vaccine at a GP's when their caregiver, their mother, wasn't with them. And the decision was made that the child was able to make that decision. So 14 is an age that has been tested in the law in the UK too. So certainly by the point that a child is 14, they're starting to have much stronger kind of emerging claims to make decisions for themselves. But parents don't always feel the same way.
Yeah, so if vaccines for COVID are going to be administered through schools, which it seems they will be, if a parent says no, what obligation does that leave on the school to canvass the child's opinion?
Yeah. So the schools are in really tricky situations there because they want to maintain relationships with whānau, and that's a really important aspect of their job, and it doesn't always serve children very well to alienate the parents. So the question is, how do the schools nurture a child's growing autonomy and ability to make their own decisions, but keep parents and families feeling supported? So I think that one thing that's important here is to try and give children what their entitlements are, but in ways that parents understand, so that their expectations about what the process are, reflect what's actually going to happen. So if a school or the health provider who's working through the school thinks that a 14-year-old is able to make their own decision, or it might even be a 13-year-old, and they want to give consent and give the vaccination, then I think it would be important for the parents to understand, under what circumstances would the children's consent operate so that they would end up receiving the vaccine. And if it's possible, it would be good practice, I suppose, to try and minimise the conflict. So maybe it's a matter of saying to the child, yes, we acknowledge that you're able to make this decision and you want the vaccination. Let's see if we can work with your mum and dad, and maybe next week or when we come back to do the second round of vaccines, they will have seen that their worries about what might happen haven't been borne out with the other children. They might be a bit happier.
But if you can't get a consensus, right, if child wants it and let's say the parents are not keen, then ultimately is this a thing that could land up in court?
Well, in theory, it could do. In theory, it could come down to a test case to determine whether children who are under the age of 16 and who appear to be competent can make their own decisions about vaccination, because there is a little bit of unclarity, and at the moment, that unclarity falls on the practitioners, so they're in a difficult position.
And that is Dr. Monique Jonas. Homai o whakaro, I'd love your feedback. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Let me know what you think the right age is for a child to give their own consent to having a COVID vaccination. That's despite what their parents may want. When do you reckon they should be allowed to choose for themselves? And New South Wales, are you stuck there, or do you have family who are stuck there? When they get back, it's 14 days in MIQ. What do you think? Right decision? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A who's who of New Zealand opera and the arts has written to the government asking for an independent review of the sector. In May, Witi Ehimaira, Murray Shaw and Rachel Walkington resigned from the board of New Zealand Opera, citing concern over the artistic direction of the company. They described as a lack of thought and responsibility towards those who love opera. Earlier this month, the 3 ex-board members, along with a host of others, wrote to the Arts, Culture and Heritage Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, asking for her help. Witi Ehimaira says a review needs to go wider than just the New Zealand Opera Company.
Apart from the fact that New Zealand Opera really did need to be looked at in terms of its operation, there was something bigger, a bigger task for us to do, and that was to seek a review of the entire opera sector in New Zealand, to reset it, to establish a new kaupapa, because it's actually quite an amazingly huge sector.
He says this could mean the end of the New Zealand Opera Company as we know it.
So what we'll be hoping for is that the Minister will look at all of these providers, including all of these providers within the Māori sector and with the Asian sector, and then have a look at that and have a look at New Zealand Opera's situation in there. Now that might mean, for instance, that in the future New Zealand Opera might not continue to exist.
A New Zealand Opera spokesperson says their company has been in touch with the Minister regarding the letter, but did not confirm if it would support a review of the sector as a whole. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei I a Checkpoint, Auckland Airport's busiest domestic travel day since March last year when COVID grounded the country. Is renting clothes worse for the planet than the fast fashion throwaways? And turning Friday into Fri-yay, a champion of the 4-day work week is urging other companies to join the club. Homai o whakaro, we love your feedback, so do get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. The age of consent to get the COVID vaccine, how young do you reckon children can be when they get the right to say, yep, I want it, even if their parents don't want them to get the injection. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anea Susanna, mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. The government has acknowledged it was a last-minute call to halt repatriation flights out of New South Wales. The flights were due to begin bringing New Zealanders home from midnight, but this afternoon they were pushed back for at least 3 days. Returnees will now also have to stay in managed isolation for 14 days when they get back, but at no cost to them. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says 1,000 rooms are being prepared. And Chris Hipkins says the risk in New South Wales is clearly escalating. 29 of Sydney's 44 new cases today are feared to have been infectious in the community before testing positive. Up to 2,500 New Zealanders could be caught up in the travel disruption. The Transport Accident Investigation Commission is investigating a hot air balloon crash near Arrowtown this morning. 11 people were injured in the accident, and 2 of them with serious internal injuries remain in a stable condition in Dunedin Hospital. Sunrise Balloon Adventures chief pilot Hugh McClellan, whose son Carrick was piloting the balloon, says it hit a low bank after being caught by a wind gust while landing. The government says any protest that impedes the Pike River Recovery Agency's work could obstruct the police investigation into the explosions, which killed 29 men in 2010. A spokesperson for 22 of the Pike River families, Bernie Monk, says their group is protesting over being left out of negotiations over the sealing of the mine. The government announced in March funding had run out and the mine would be sealed after. A man has been sentenced to life in prison for murdering his 5-year-old son in February last year. 25-year-old William James Seo appeared in the High Court at Rotorua this morning after admitting to the assault, neglect and murder of Pharaoh James Seo. He will serve 17 years before being eligible to apply for parole. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Kia ora rā, Eho. Just to hand some news about the water supply here in the South Island. Dunedin City Council is reminding residents the do not drink notice remains in place for water supplies to Waikouaiti, Karatane and Hawkesbury Village. Now, they're putting this reminder notice out after freshwater quality tests received today detected E. coli in the drinking water network at Karatane, which is an indication of microbial contamination. Now, remembering there was a lead no drink notice earlier, this is still in place and ongoing testing has detected this E. coli. They go on to say that nobody in Karatane should be drinking the water anyway or using it for food preparation while the do not drink notice remains in force, and says they only have one positive result for E. coli that has been returned at Karatane, but at this stage it's too early to say what the cause is and further testing will happen over the weekend. But in the meantime, don't drink the water, don't use it for food prep. There is a do not drink notice still in place and it remains in force, and water tanks are available in all 3 communities, they say, so you can continue drawing water from those tanks. Right, it is time now for business. Ko taku hoa inai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who is in the studio. Let's start with the Commerce Commission. It's expecting new regulations are going to bring down fuel prices. So what's changed?
Well, people might recall there was a fuel industry review by the government in 2019. And as a result of that review, some measures have been taken by the Commerce Commission to improve, disclosure and also remove restrictive practices. So, for example, wholesale, and it's mostly initially it's going to take effect next month, and it's for wholesale fuel sellers at the moment. And basically, what it is they must publish their spot price, and that anybody, even their competitors, can get the fuel at that price. As well, there can be no restrictive contracts. So if you do have a contract with a particular supplier and you want to buy it from someone else, you can. And so these things are supposed to, end up reducing the price of fuel. Now, in February, there's another part of this change, which is going to require the lowest valued petrol to be advertised at the pump for retailer, like at the retail pump, so that motorists can travel past and say, this is the cheapest price, that's the one I want to pay, and then that is actually the price. So there will be no more of this...
pulling in and discovering, whoops, no, I don't really want that, but I'm here now.
Exactly. So it's really a matter of disclosing what you're doing. And that probably will go to some... I guess it's not going to affect the price of fuel itself, but it may make it more competitive for people.
Okay, let's move on to build-to-rent developments. And momentum is picking up. Are we talking about commercial here, and what's driving it?
It's this thing. It's called the design of the interest.
For those who are listening rather than watching, it's a rather weighty report that Nona's going to slap down on the desk.
It's really heavy, and it's over 140 pages, and it's called The Design of the Interest Limitation Rule and Additional Bright Line Rules, a government discussion document. Submissions close on Monday. Right. And as a result of that, it's opened up a widespread discussion about build-to-rent accommodation. Right. So this is not build-to-own apartments. These are ones that you would rent. And what the industry is saying is, this is a great idea. It's going to solve our problems for housing. But we have to have surety, not me, I mean them, on interest rate deductions and other measures. So they want to have rules that are similar to what's in place for retirement villages. They want to be treated the same as any other commercial property developer. And so they want this addressed as part of the government's review of this bright line test. Because as you know, the government has removed the interest rate deduction for residential property rentals. So they don't want to be caught up in that. And they want the government to set up special rules just to cover build-to-rent accommodation. And it would be units, we're talking about like 50 units, and it would be long-term rental leases, that sort of thing, for people who really aren't going to be in the market to buy a property.
Okay, shall we take a whiz around the markets then?
Yeah, interesting times on the market. You know, Asian shares stumbled to their 2-month low on Friday, and it was their worst performance since February. And the reason why is the confidence over the Delta virus and the spread. It's spreading really all sorts of places. And so the market was pretty awful, but we weren't so badly off. We fell 62 points, or 0.5% to 12,690. So, you know, relatively speaking, that's not too bad. Our Kiwi, though, took a dive overnight, and it's held on to that lower value at 69.4 US cents. But against the Australian, hardly changed, 93.5 Australian and 50.4 British pence.
Ngā mihi, Nona. And that's Nona Peltier with Business. And the business owner who championed the 4-day working week says New Zealand lags behind the rest of the world when it comes to leaving Monday to Friday behind. Perpetual Guardian was the first company to trial an extra day off in 2018 and has been doing it ever since, citing increased productivity and happier employees. But its founder, Andrew Barnes, says it's been too slow to catch on here. Amy Williams filed this report.
Andrew Barnes is on a mission to turn Friday into Fri-yay. He's spoken about the benefits of a 4-day working week in 96 countries and is now fronting a campaign to get businesses to sign up to a global pilot as part of a large-scale research project. It's been almost 3 years since his company, Perpetual Guardian, took the plunge.
Sick days have halved. We're better able to attract and retain high-quality staff. But the key thing is our employees are healthier and happier, and they can be the best they can be in the office and the best they can be at home.
The global trial begins next year, and researchers from universities around the world will track the results. It'll be larger in scope than a raft of recent studies out of countries including Iceland, which showed increased productivity and better well-being. Mr Barnes hopes New Zealand companies will get on board, as so far few have adopted a 4-day working week.
It is one of the frustrations that 3 years on, New Zealand employment legislation and Holidays Act legislation actually penalises companies attempting to implement the 4-day week.
Currently, companies fall foul of employment legislation if they give workers multiple days off on top of their leave, and it's complicated to draw up a contract that fits. He says the government could introduce 4-day legislation to remove barriers and encourage businesses to give it a go.
The Japanese are passing 4-day week legislation, the Indians are passing it, the Russians are passing it, and everywhere you look now, The 4-day week is now a mainstream issue for discussion and for experimentation.
The global consumer goods company Unilever is halfway through its New Zealand trial of a 4-day week. Researchers at the University of Technology Sydney Business School are tracking the trial, which ends in December. Professor Bronwyn Dalton heads its Department of Management and says before moving to a 4-day week, some staff struggled with work-life balance.
30% said that they find that the demands of work interfere with home and personal life, which suggests to me that a 4-day week has the potential to really address this particular issue that they've identified at the beginning.
Researchers will conduct 2 surveys as the trial progresses to track results. Ms Dalton says they'll also study how different people are affected, such as parents with preschoolers.
It'll be interesting to see different demographics and characteristics and what kinds of employees thrive best with this kind of arrangement, because we don't want one-size-fits-all.
Unilever declined to comment for the story. AUT professor Jared Ha has researched the benefits of a 4-day week, but estimates less than 1% of New Zealand companies have even trialled dropping a day.
These are the conversations 99% of New Zealand companies aren't having. That's what I'm suggesting. Make a start and have a conversation.
Most companies here are small to medium businesses with fewer than 20 employees. Dr. Ha says that shouldn't be a barrier, as workers could take different days off.
If you give a trial and you say, actually, we find out that we close for half a day on a Friday, hallelujah. It's better than, and we get everything done. That's still better than what we have at the moment.
Businesses around the world are signing up to trial a shorter week, including the crowdfunding platform Kickstarter.
Renting clothes is often praised as the answer to fight the tide of fast fashion. But is it as green as we think? An international studies found it's actually worse for the planet than throwing clothes away due to hidden environmental costs. Louise Tanuth and camera operator Nick Munro look into the issue here.
Whatever the occasion, new outfits not only hurt the wallet, but the planet too. According to Stats New Zealand, Kiwis spend around $3.6 billion on clothing and footwear each year, and that figure's only rising, which means we dispose of it more often to keep up with the latest trend. But for every kg of clothing sent to landfill, that gives off 3.6 kgs of carbon emissions. So renting one for a fraction of the price and just one night seems like a great idea.
I just want a one-stop shop where I can get all the dresses that I need because I'm only probably going to wear it once, and then, I can just bring it back when I'm done.
I know that if I buy something, I'm not going to wear it again or like 10 times over. So this gives you the option of choosing, whatever for every different occasion. Yeah, I love it.
But a study assessing the environmental impacts of different ways of owning and disposing of clothing found renting was hardest on the planet. The hidden environmental costs were transporting the rentals to different stores, delivery, packaging and dry cleaning. It suggests rental companies changed their logistics to make them more climate friendly. One store who's doing just that is Designer Wardrobe here in Auckland. Co-founder Aidan Barlett says demand has skyrocketed over the last few years.
We have over 4,000 rentals. Around half of that is here at our Newmarket store. This is our flagship. And we are doing thousands of rentals every week. So it's really ramping up.
They're changing the way they do things to reduce their carbon footprint.
A big part of the Designer Wardrobe mission is sustainability and circularity. So that's something that we've been really conscious on in terms of our processes and how we work things. So we send everything in our now reusable garment bags across the country, and we're also partnered with New Zealand Post, who have been carbon neutral since 2021. On top of that, we have our stores, which means that people can come in and pick stuff up to avoid travel.
They also use the local dry cleaner and don't allow transfers to different stores for try-ons. And rentals are replaced wherever possible to extend their lifetime. While it's got to be better than buying something every day from fast fashion stores, Professor of Life Cycle Management Dr. Sarah McLaren says if we make a frequent habit of renting, the impacts add up. Instead, we need to shift our focus to the clothes we've already purchased in our wardrobes.
But actually what we need to do is be focusing much more on the items that we've got and getting the best use out of them and keeping them for longer.
That's the motto of New Zealand fashion designer Kate Sylvester. 3 years ago, they launched a free repair service, and it's keeping them busy.
They trickle in all the time, and it's just a really nice service to offer. And some of the things, like it's amazing. We've had pieces that have come in that are like 20 years old, and it's incredibly, it's great for our staff to see these pieces that, for some of our customers, for some of our staff, these clothes are older than they are.
And customers' pre-loved items are able to be sold on too.
And then we also have our Reloved platform where our customers, if they want to move on from a garment, then they can sell it on to somebody else. So again, it's not sitting in the back of a wardrobe doing nothing, it can be handed on to somebody else. So the whole journey of our clothes and what we can do at every step to ensure that they have as long a life as possible.
Not everyone can afford sustainable fashion, but the issue lies in how often we consume it and how often it's produced, purchased and discarded. So next time you're browsing the racks, think, how often will I wear this and will it last?
If you were listening to that piece from Louise, we'll put the video up on our Facebook page. It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Muriaki in Piti Piti Kōrero after the news at 6. Sunrise Balloons has temporarily suspended commercial flights following an accident that's left 11 people injured. It's arguably the little train that couldn't quite get into the main commuter hub in Auckland City, but it's apparently edging closer. The controversial Te Huia train from Hamilton to Auckland currently only goes as far as Papakura, where people have to change services, taking about another hour to actually get into the city. But from later this month, on Saturdays, Te Huia will head right the way into Auckland, but to the slightly off-piste Strand station. Councillor Hugh Vercoe from Te Huia's governance group explains why it's only a once-a-week offer.
At this stage, the Saturday service is fine because you've got lesser traffic coming in from Auckland Network and others. We wanted to go into Britomart, we wanted to go to Puanui for the links there, and those are still options that we'd like to. But we're pleased that we've been able to get into the Strand on a Saturday and to start up there. We will look at doing interpeak services with Te Huia. It seems a waste to go up in the morning, sit there all day and then come back when there is demand for interpeak services. And that's one of the next things that we're looking at implementing.
Okay, so to be clear, the reason you're going into the Strand just on Saturdays is congestion on the rails means that's the only time you can get a spot at this stage.
Yes, it is, and KiwiRail have been very, very good to us, trying to support us in what we're trying to do. We initially had it planned for 3 years' time to actually make this move, but we've been able to bring it forward. The council has put local funding in to bring it forward, and it's great that it is starting.
The Strand is sort of off-piste though, isn't it? It's not into a commuter hub, it's not going into Newmarket or Britomart.
Correct, yes. But it's not that far away.
So where are the main links that the people are trying to jump onto from the Strand?
You can't. You've got to go to Britomart if you want to get links to go elsewhere, in which case
Isn't that the point though, Hugh?
What we're told on a weekend is that people want to go up and spend the day in Auckland. So to make that happen, we've either got to go with the original concept, which is go to Papakura. But then a lot of the Auckland network is shut on Saturday. The rails are closed because they're doing maintenance on them. So we can't guarantee people that on a Saturday they can take the Te Huia to Papakura and get on the Auckland Transport Network and get into Britomart. We can take them straight through to the Strand. They don't have to change trains. They get the one ticket. They stay on the same train and they get off at the Strand. That's, if you like, a little bit of a compromise, but it's heading in the right direction and it's responding to what the people are telling us.
How many commuters are taking the train weekdays on average?
On average, about 100.
Really? Because I saw figures the other day saying 34 people on average.
No, it depends. You've got an early train that goes first thing in the morning and then a slightly later train. What we're finding is that the earlier train is not well supported. The later train is. And coming back, the earlier train coming back is more supported than the other one. Rather than take a knee-jerk reaction and say, hey, the early morning train is not being supported, let's change the timing on it, we're saying, well, let's just hold your breath, take a look and say, is it the right time? Is it the wrong time? Should we consult the people that are using it and do a bit of research before making a sudden decision to change the time?
Hugh, you would appreciate that there is a number of critics who think this is a half-baked service because it doesn't actually bring you into Auckland or tee you up with some of the main trunk commuter hubs when it is supposed to be a commuter service. That's a fair criticism, isn't it?
No, totally fair criticism. It started as a commuter service.
Then when are you going to fix it?
You're looking at a broader picture, and those people that thought that we were going to start a commuter service and that was all it was going to be, was not the idea of what we're trying to do. And your bigger picture is looking at Auckland that's growing to the south, we're looking at Hamilton that's growing to the north, Pocono and those areas, they're getting enormous traffic on there. And the ability for people to get in their motor cars and drive from Hamilton to Auckland is becoming more and more frustrating. Now, as your corridor between Auckland and Hamilton starts developing and you're getting to Kowhata and Mercer and all the other areas developing, there's more restrictions on traffic to be able to use that expressway. So we're saying long-term we need a train service between Auckland and Hamilton, and we need it regular, and we need it fast, and we need it stopping at each point. That's the long-term vision. It's not just a commuter train that's always going to be just for commuters.
So, Hugh, to get fast links in there regularly, how long are people going to have to wait for that to happen? Every day of the week?
Yeah, quite some time, being honest with you.
In a nutshell, is this value for money?
It's a start point. Yes, it is. If we don't start looking and saying, what are we trying to build for the future, then the whole area will be gridlocked. Hamilton is getting gridlocked at the moment. Auckland is diabolical to go in there. It's all very well getting there, but then by the time you find a car park and get to where you want to go, we've got to make some changes. And train travel is one of those changes. And yes, if somebody would give us a whole lot of money, we would make it faster and more reliable and everything else. But we're dealing with what we've got.
And that was Councillor Hugh Vercoe from the Waikato Regional Council. Are the country's public toilets up to scratch when it comes to helping wipe out the spread of COVID-19? Well, new research by Otago University suggests many aren't, with no soap, no touchless technology and no COVID-19 messaging. Local bodies are now being told to up their game at places Kiwis do their business. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Dom Thomas went toilet testing.
Checkpoint is on the hunt for that perfect public privy. That's because a couple of Otago University researchers have found some of our public toilets are, well, short a few things they need for this COVID-19 era. So let's take a look. Our first toilet stop is a 24-hour all-gender cubicle in Berhampore. Does this meet the mark when it comes to pandemic-worthy potties? So let's run through Checkpoint's public toilet checklist. As you can see, this toilet has soap to wash your hands. It has running water with no-touch taps, which do actually work if you give them a couple of taps. Let's see if we can get this to go. Still not wanting to go, still not wanting to go. So for anyone in a rush, they may not wash their hands here because it seems like the running water doesn't run on demand. But what this toilet does have is a toilet seat. That is one thing on the checklist, a closable toilet seat. What it doesn't have is COVID-19 information. It also doesn't have generic information on why you should wash your hands. And as for COVID-19 QR codes, well, we've found a tiny little QR code on the wall here, but clearly not a COVID-19 check-in. So we take a drive downtown towards Dixon Street, a more populated part of the city, to a row of public toilets that may well be some of Wellington's most used. Did these bogs better align with what the Otago researchers were looking for? Now, for people who frequent or live in Wellington, they'll know these toilets, the well-known Pigeon Park cubicles. On a Saturday night, they can look a little bit worse for wear, but it's a Friday morning here, so let's see how they look. Now, for those of you listening, not watching, this cubicle has soap to wash your hands. It has running water, but it's a touch tap as opposed to a non-touch tap. There's a lid for once you've done your business. There's a flusher, but again, it's a touch flusher. Once again, what it doesn't have, COVID-19 information, a QR code to scan when you come in here, and general information on washing your hands. One of the academics behind the University of Otago's survey of 400 different dunnies is Professor Nick Wilson. He and colleague George Thompson's work is officially titled Deficient Hand-Washing Amenities in Public Toilets in the Time of the COVID-19 Pandemic, a multi-regional survey.
Well, the aim was to actually see what was happening with the hygiene of these public amenities at the time of a period of increased pandemic risk.
And some of the findings stunk. Toilet bowl lids, which the World Health Organization says prevent droplet splatter and aerosol clouds, were not present at 32.8% of the 400 surveyed. And that's just the start, according to Professor Wilson.
The concerning finding was that there were 15% with no soap at all, and even 3% had no running water for hand washing. Also, somewhat concerning is that only 28% had the no-touch automatic feature for activating the hand washing.
Add to that the lack of COVID-19 related messaging at public facilities. Health advice was displayed at just 19.5%, with the QR code for contact tracing displayed in just 12.3%.
Even then, some of them had fallen off the wall and were on the ground and so on, so it was not a very satisfactory situation.
Professor Wilson says the lack of QR codes, let alone general COVID messaging, is a mess local bodies could look to clean up.
We've been arguing for a whole range of improvements with the alert level system and use of masks, speeding up the vaccination process, but addressing these basic hygiene issues is good not just for COVID-19, but also for a wide range of other infectious diseases.
For many, the urge to use that grotty public loo is quickly replaced by the urge to wipe and run. But Nick Wilson suggests there should also be an urge to scan, saying public toilets are the perfect petri dish for COVID.
We know now that aerosol transmission is important, so it's possible someone infected with COVID could actually contaminate the airspace in a highly enclosed environment like a public toilet. So yes, it's an obvious place to have QR codes and to have, obviously, all the hygiene at a very state-of-the-art level.
Nick Wilson says there's little consistency from loo to loo, with some pictures of hygiene and others with some cleaning up to do.
Wow, with all that talk of petri dishes and aerosolising, I hope our Nick Trowbridge did wash his hands. If you were listening to this on radio, we'll put the video up on our Facebook page so you can check it out. On the subject of how old should a child be to give consent to a COVID vaccination without their parents' views being taken into account, this person says kids over 10 at the very least should be able to have the vaccine against their parents' wishes. Any older would be a joke and an insult to children's intelligence. Someone else says, what happens if the parents want the 14-year-old or older child to be vaccinated and the child opposes? Yeah, interesting. And they would be interested, Maria says, to hear the thoughts of others on that one.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with the MA. Up to 2,500 New Zealanders could be caught up in the travel disruption wrought by COVID-19 spread through New South Wales. Mercy flights were due to depart the Australian state from midnight, but have been abruptly cancelled by the government due to the escalating risk. Returnees will be rebooked on flights from Tuesday, but will now have to spend 2 weeks in a managed isolation hotel on arrival. The COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, says 1,000 rooms are being prepared.
We will be saying to people who don't have an urgent need to return home, please hold back, so that those who do urgently need to return back to New Zealand can do so.
Flights for New Zealanders stranded in Queensland will still go ahead from Saturday. The company, which operates the hot air balloon which crashed while landing near Arrowtown this morning, says the balloon's basket was caught by a sudden wind gust as it came into land. The Sunrise balloon's trip was coming to an end after an uneventful hour-long flight just before 10 o'clock this morning. The crash injured the balloon's 10 passengers and pilot, with 2 taken to Dunedin Hospital with serious internal injuries. They remain there in a serious but stable condition. Sunrise Balloons says the basket hit a low bank after being caught by the wind gust. Chief pilot Hugh McClellan, whose son Carrick was piloting the balloon, says he's deeply upset and an internal investigation is underway. The owner of the land where the balloon crashed says it bounced across his paddock before coming to a stop. Philip Bunn says his sisters were at home when the balloon came down on their Morven Ferry Road property near Arrowtown.
One was in the tractor feeding deer, and she witnessed it. And then another sister was in the house at the time, and the first she knew of it was when she heard the people screaming.
The Transport Accident Investigation Commission says investigators are likely to be at the crash site for several days. A man's been sentenced to life in prison for murdering his young son in February last year. 25-year-old William James Seo appeared in the High Court at Rotorua this morning after previously admitting 5 charges, including the assault, neglect and murder of Pharaoh James Seo. Jean Bell reports.
Pharaoh James Seo was 5 years old when he died following neglect and physical abuse at the hands of his father. William James Seo was sentenced to life imprisonment and will serve 17 years before being eligible to apply for parole. The police say the death was tragic and the child was killed by the very person who was meant to care for and protect him.
The global consumer goods company Unilever is halfway through its New Zealand trial of a 4-day work week. Researchers at the University of Technology Sydney Business School are tracking the trial, which ends in December. Bronwyn Dalton heads its Department of Management and says before moving to a 4-day week, some staff struggled with work-life balance.
30% said that they find that the demands of work interfere with home and personal life, which suggests to me that a 4-day week has the potential to really address this particular issue that they've identified at the beginning.
Professor Dalton says researchers will conduct 2 surveys as the trial progresses to track results. A survey has found the poor state of public toilets could increase the transmission of disease. The New Zealand Medical Journal says the results show local and central government agencies have not done enough to keep up hygiene standards. Almost 3/4 of the 400 public toilets surveyed had no health-related signs and 1 in 8 had no soap. Nick Wilson from Otago University says other countries, such as Japan, do a far better job.
We actually found there were some problems. 15% had no soap, 3% had no water for hand washing, and only 28% had the safer no-touch activation for providing water for hand washing.
Professor Wilson says the survey results suggest central government should perform regular audits of public toilets. E. coli has been detected in the drinking water network in Karitane, north of Dunedin. The town is one of 3 in the area still under a do not drink notice after elevated levels of lead were found in the water supply in February. Dunedin City Council 3 Waters Group manager Tom Dyer says no one in Karitane is supposed to be drinking tap water or using it for food preparation while the do not drink notice remains in place. The notice also remains for Waikuaiti and Hawkesbury Village. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. After a 10-year hiatus, the All Blacks will finally play Fiji again when the 2 sides clash in Dunedin tomorrow night. The Fijians will dedicate the match to their nation as it continues to battle COVID-19, and their jerseys will have Vaccinate Fiji emblazoned on the front. Despite having been beaten comfortably in all 5 previous encounters, former Crusaders player Nemani Nandolo, who now plays for English club Leicester, says they must believe they can compete.
We've got a lot of fuel to go out there, a lot of motivation. Our people back home in Fiji are struggling with the current epidemic, and obviously we're here away from our families, a sacrifice that we've had to do to put our hands up to come and represent Fiji. So I think people don't understand the severity of what we've had to do to come here.
The New Zealand Olympic team's head psychologist says athletes are well prepared for a Games without spectators. All spectators have now been banned from the Tokyo Games, which start in a fortnight, amid a new state of emergency in the city due to COVID-19. Kylie Wilson says many athletes have already been competing internationally in empty stadiums. She says they are still recording personal bests and learning not to rely on the energy of the crowd to achieve a top performance. New Zealand boxer Joseph Parker has reportedly contracted COVID-19 while in training with world heavyweight champion Tyson Fury in Las Vegas. Parker has been helping Fury prepare for his upcoming title fight against American Deontay Wilder. ESPN is reporting Fury has also contracted coronavirus and the fight has been postponed. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Detail host Emile Donovan selects the mixtape. Lady Six is the Friday Night Live act. Country Life follows the Wellington puppeteer who's now planting native trees on a block of land in North Otago. There's also a meeting with some Southland whisky makers. And because Parliament passed the homosexual law reform bill on this day in 1986, we've got a sonic tonic dedicated to rainbows. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Whanganui, including Coromandel and Central High Country. Fine spells, a few showers, especially in the west. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Also Manawatu to Kapiti Coast, fine weather. Wellington and Wairarapa, fine. However, a few showers tomorrow morning. Bulla, showers becoming isolated tomorrow morning. Westland, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. However, showers for Westland north of the glaciers and isolated showers about the Kaikoura coast tomorrow morning. For Otago, Southland and Clutha, widespread showers, isolated for north and central Otago. Snow lowering to 200 metres in the south tonight. Southwesterly gales about the coast. And Chatham Islands, periods of rain or showers. Hail is possible. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A red light has been put on green flights for Kiwis stuck in Sydney as cases surged there again today. The New South Wales government announced 44 new community cases, up from yesterday's 14-month high of 38. 10 people are in ICU, including 2 people aged in their 20s and 30s. And for New Zealanders, that means the current pause on flights from Sydney to Auckland has been extended by 3 days. After that, green flights will be able to arrive, but Kiwis will have to spend 14 days in managed isolation. But COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says not everyone will be able to secure a spot in MIQ, with only 1,000 rooms being made available.
So we will be saying to people who don't have an urgent need to return home, please hold back, so that those who do urgently need to return back to New Zealand can do so. We'll be working with the airlines more on the processes around that just over the next 24 hours so that we can give greater guidance to travellers about what to expect.
Those forced to spend 14 days in isolation would not have to pay for their managed isolation stay. Here's Max Toll with this report on the developing situation in Sydney.
New South Wales, and in fact no state or nation or any country on the planet, can live with the Delta variant when our vaccination rates are so low.
If Sydney-siders were hoping for a quick and efficient lockdown, they were dreaming. 44 new cases today, an astonishing 29 of which may have been infectious in the community. Worrying signs for New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian.
In the next few days, those numbers are going to go up. It tells us that both the case numbers and, unfortunately, the number of people who may be exposed or have been exposed in the community is going to go up. This is the opposite of where we need or want the numbers to trend.
Gladys Berejiklian says there's no way she can see restrictions easing next Friday unless a miracle occurs. In fact, the New South Wales government is tightening lockdown measures in Sydney, including restricting how far people can exercise away from their homes and stopping them from doing so in groups.
Exercise within 10 kilometres of where you live or within your local government area. Do not carpool. You're not allowed to carpool with anybody outside of your household when it comes to exercising, and we need to be very clear about that.
Meanwhile, dozens of extra police officers descended on southwest Sydney today in areas where the coronavirus is spreading between households. Yesterday, Gladys Berejiklian said a particular problem was people defying lockdown rules to visit family and friends. But the threat of police has been met with alarm.
It seems a very confrontational thing rather than improve public messaging.
And local councillor Charisma Kalianda says the largely ethnic community in the southwest is being unfairly targeted.
You didn't hear, police being deployed to the local coal at Bondi Junction, standing at the front, checking who was in their homes or telling people when they could go into the shopping centre and that sort of thing. And that's the kind of picture that you have at places like Carnes Hill, for example.
So, bad news for Sydney, but good news for Queensland, which recorded a donut day with no new cases. Yet Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk says she's still looking south.
The eyes of Australia really are on Sydney at the epicentre of the Delta strain at the moment, because our biggest concern is if that's not contained and brought under control, it'll spread right throughout the country.
And good news for Australia. Its vaccination rollout has been brought forward by 4 to 6 weeks after doses of the Pfizer jab became available earlier than planned.
In the month of June, we had 1.7 million Pfizer doses. This month, we'll have 2.8 million. And in August, we'll have 4.5 million. That's what's been outlined to us by Pfizer.
Scott Morrison says every Australian will be offered a vaccine by the end of the year.
11 people have been injured in a hot air balloon crash near Arrowtown this morning. The crash happened as the balloon was coming down to land and wind dragged it for more than 100 metres before it hit power lines. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has more.
It was meant to be an idyllic sightseeing flight over the Whakatipu Basin, but it turned into a terrifying ordeal for those on board. The hot air balloon came down in a paddock on Morven Ferry Road near Arrowtown just before 10 o'clock this morning. St John's Central Otago Territory Manager, David Bailey, says after the balloon crashed, it was dragged for some distance and left the 11 on board strewn over the area.
It was spread over a scene of approximately 150 metres. Unaware of exactly what has happened with the people, but they were spread over a distance at the scene.
Mr Bailey says the balloon was dragged through power lines and then into a house at the site. Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt says he was briefed by the police following the accident.
The landing was normal, but the balloon was hit by a gust of wind on landing. And look, as I say, that's simply what I've been told at this point in time.
Garth Dawson is holidaying about 10 kilometres from the crash site. He says his children noticed the balloon as it flew by.
I grabbed my camera because it was close by and just started taking photos of it because it floated past down the Shotover River and then it went up in the air and then came down and then went up and then it carried on floating on down and then floated over towards Arrowtown. And then it went up really high and we thought, it must be going over the hills. And it just seemed to just come down slowly, like a normal descent.
He says he's still trying to piece together what happened after it went out of sight, as it was such a clear day with hardly any wind.
It doesn't compute, no. It's, you would think it just seemed like a normal flight. They were taking people and showing them the Shotover River down close and then going up high to get a good view over Lake Hayes and the Shotover area and then coming down into land.
Local journalist Leanne Malcolm got as close to the scene as possible soon after the crash.
There is only one operator of these balloons in Queenstown. It's Sunrise Balloons, and they've been here for years. I've seen them all the time. They used to land in my paddock occasionally. I don't live that far from here, and you just don't expect this to happen. They have had a pretty good record from what I can tell.
She says wind appears to be a factor in what went wrong.
I know that a couple of people who were in the basket were actually found in a paddock, sort of a distance from the actual crash, which is interesting. But there is this talk of this wind gust as it came in and it being dragged across. And so obviously there is information to piece together.
The Transport Accident Investigation Commission is investigating. Commission spokesperson Simon Pleasance says investigators from Wellington and Christchurch will be at the scene tomorrow morning.
The Commission has opened an investigation into the accident and has appointed a team of 2 investigators to travel to the site. They are doing so later today and will be on site tomorrow morning.
He says they'll be in the area for several days gathering information and evidence. The Civil Aviation Authority is also investigating. In a statement, Sunrise Balloons says all those on board were injured when the balloon was caught by a sudden wind gust and the basket hit a low bank. One of the company's directors, pilot Carrick McClellan, sustained moderate injuries. His father, Hugh McClellan, is the company's other director and chief pilot. He says he is deeply upset about what has happened and an internal investigation is underway. The company has been operating in the region for 23 years without incident.
A Wellington College pupil has been forced to change bus services after feeling ridiculed by a bus driver who has refused to stop and pick him up. The boy's family made 2 complaints about the driver after he failed to stop and failed to wait for the correct departure time at his Wellington suburb. As Ben Strang found out, the driver didn't take the complaints too well.
Since the school year started, the 13-year-old has had on and off issues trying to catch the 7:41 bus from his Kelburn stop to Wellington College. The bus is meant to leave his stop at 8:19 a.m, and the boy routinely arrives up to 5 minutes early. But even then, sometimes he misses the bus as it's already come and gone, as his father explains.
Him missing the bus and getting late to school was no fault of his own. It was primarily the bus arriving earlier than the scheduled arrival time. And it's my understanding that if the bus arrives early, it is incumbent upon the bus driver to wait at the bus stop and leave at the scheduled departure time, and that has not been happening.
There have also been times where the driver simply hasn't picked up the teenager, even though the bus hasn't been full. The boy's parents recently lodged complaints with Metlink on both counts and were told that the driver had been talked to about being more reliable. But after 2 complaints, the driver vented his anger at the boy.
There were 3 students waiting at the bus stop, one of which was my son. They both got on the bus, and upon getting on the bus driver confronted the 3 students, asking them who was responsible for the complaints, and my son said it was him. At that point, the bus driver, I understand, quite aggressively expressed his displeasure and threatened my son that if any more complaints were laid against him, the bus driver, that he would not let him on the bus.
Dressed down in front of his peers, the boy felt humiliated and bullied by the driver and unsure if he still wanted to use the bus service. His parents told Metlink about the exchange in a complaint last week. When the boy next attempted to take the bus on Monday of this week, the driver followed through on his threat and drove straight past his stop.
I'm not sure whether there was room on the bus for my son, but the bus driver made no attempt to stop and explain to my son if there wasn't any room, that he couldn't uplift him. My son, however, thought that there was plenty of space for him to stand. Even though there was no sitting room, there was certainly standing room, in my son's opinion. So the bus driver blew straight past him.
The father again complained, but he doesn't think NZ Bus, the company running the 7:41 service, is taking the complaints seriously. He says the driver should be taken off the route and at the very least placed onto a different route and not allowed to continue bullying his son. RNZ was there this morning as the boy attempted to use the bus for the first time since Monday. The bus arrived more than 5 minutes early and he had to run to get onto it before it pulled away. In fact, the driver did close the doors and start to pull away, but stopped to let the boy on. He left the stop more than 5 minutes before the scheduled departure. In a statement, Metlink's General Manager Scott Gallagher says he's sorry to hear of the family's concerns and is looking forward to a positive resolution.
We cannot comment on the details of this case, however, as the investigation's still proceeding. What I can say is that we expect all staff throughout the Metlink network to treat customers fairly and with respect. Where we discover that's not the case, we raise the issue with our operators and expect them to act on maintaining high standards of behaviour.
RNZ understands disciplinary action has been taken against the driver, but he continues to drive. NZ Bus says it can't comment while the investigation is underway.
Auckland Airport is having its busiest day since March last year when the COVID-19 pandemic screeched travel to a stop. 28,000 Kiwis are expected to stream through the domestic terminal today as 2 weeks of school holidays kicks off tomorrow. Jean Bell went to see who was taking flight.
About 700,000 departures and arrivals are forecast for this month, about 90% of flights pre-pandemic. Among those set to jet today is Auckland woman Debbie, who's travelling to Dunedin with her husband and their 2 young children.
It's exciting because it's the first time I've been on an aeroplane for, 2 years.
Her 10-year-old son Max is also looking forward to the flight.
Pretty exciting, feels good to get back on the plane.
A short walk down the terminal, Lika is behind the counter at a coffee cart. She's had a very busy morning.
So I open up at 5 in the morning, everyone is lining up outside. Oh my goodness. Yeah, but it's really busy.
However, taxi driver Joseph has been waiting for a customer for 2.5 hours, but no bites yet.
I'm still waiting for a fare, so that's like a normal day. So it's not really busy.
He says this is the norm following COVID. Some drivers have had their income about halved in the pandemic aftermath.
Most of the guys are making 2 fares, which is pretty little. It's like 180 to 250. Before was like 350 to 450 a day, yeah.
Relay domestic team leader Avlash Chand says the convenience store expects a boost from the holidays.
So we look forward to school holidays or long weekends to sort of boost up more people travelling throughout the nation. So that gives us a bit of a boost in sales.
Purvash Rawat works at Ergo Convenience Store. He says today has been busy and he thinks tomorrow will follow suit.
We will see more people tomorrow because today is the last school day. So more kids tomorrow, heaps of business people as well. They are trying to get back to the work and they will be back tonight or maybe tomorrow morning. So tomorrow morning will be the busiest.
He expects sales to bump up about 20% during the school holidays. Auckland Airport's Scott Tasker says it's great to see the domestic terminal so busy.
Today we're expecting about 20,000 people to depart and arrive on jet flights, so those are the flights that go to and from the main centres, and about 8,000 on regional flights to the provinces. And it looks like Christchurch is going to be the most popular destination today, with about 52 arriving and departing flights, whilst in the regions, Nelson looks like it's the winner, the top destination, with about 26 flights.
During the school holidays, 10,000 people are expected to fly to Arrowtown from Auckland, taking advantage of the travel bubble. Air New Zealand has added 2 more trips, meaning holidaymakers can catch one of the 11 different flights per week from mid-August. This will increase to 12 flights per week from October. Scott Tasker thinks this is good news for the Cook Islands.
And that's fantastic because, of course, the Cook Islands is a country that's really close to New Zealand and their economy is very dependent on tourism. So it's great that lots of Kiwis are taking the opportunity to go and get some sunshine.
Meanwhile, Debbie is happy to be travelling down south, but it wouldn't be her first pick if she could head anywhere in the world.
Probably start off nipping over to Byron Bay because we've got friends over there, and then I'd want to go see my family in England, my dad in London and my brother in Manchester, because they've had it pretty bad. We've had it real cruisy in New Zealand comparatively.
But her 8-year-old daughter Indigo has her eye on an even colder destination.
Probably the North Pole because there's lots of snow and I'll probably be able to see penguins.
For now, though, in these COVID times, it's destinations closer to home for many these school holidays.
It's 6:25 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. For some people with disabilities, getting a vaccine can be a confronting process, especially if they're hypersensitive to light, noise and crowds. That's where a one-day community clinic in Dunedin has stepped in today to help people feel more comfortable. Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton visited the clinic and filed this report.
Cool, easy. So my hand is cold, I'm sorry. So just about here. Yeah. So it's going to sting just a little bit. Just try and relax your arm if you can. Okay, cool.
Like that.
That's community care client David Martin King getting his first COVID-19 vaccine this morning. It's being run out of the Trust building in South Dunedin, which supports people with intellectual disabilities and autistic spectrum disorders across Otago and Southland. Mr. King says he felt much more comfortable being in a familiar environment.
I just trust people. I trust
the professionals with this jab. A lot more accessible to come down here, a lot more easy, less stressful to come down here.
Mr. King is also an advocate for people with learning disabilities. He's glad they don't have to rely on going to the larger vaccination hubs.
They'll be scared and confused how the system works. Without the right support with them going to those places, they'll be really unsure and not sure about the whole thing. So for them is a different atmosphere, different scenery, and they're not used to it. Here, they are used to it. With the right staff, they know.
The Trust's independent living team leader, Michael Hawkins, says they're doing what they can to reduce people's stress, including booking people in with their support person.
It's more comfortable for them coming into a familiar setting with familiar people. Some people get quite anxious in public settings, so having a place where they're very familiar is ideal for them.
That can also mean dimming the lights and closing the curtains so people who are hypersensitive to light and noise feel more comfortable. The Trust has provided transport to help some people with physical disabilities who may have trouble accessing traditional clinics. The Southern DHB's vaccine rollout co-leader Carl Metzler says it's been a successful day, with an estimated 150 people getting their first vaccine.
The All Blacks play Fiji for the first time in 10 years tomorrow night, with fans hoping for more of a contest in Dunedin than last week's 102-0 win over Tonga at Mount Smart. Unlike Tonga, who've had to pluck players from club rugby with many of their stars unavailable, Fiji have been able to select their strongest team, bar a few players who will play for the Fiji Sevens team at the Tokyo Olympics. Our rugby reporter Joe Porter has more.
Fiji's build-up has been just as difficult as Tonga's, with coach Vern Cotter revealing 3 of his top players are stuck in Australia.
A lot of the players have come from Europe, so the managed isolation was a challenge in itself, and the disappointing thing is not being able to get 3 players out of Australia, with the Trans-Tasman bubble being blocked.
He says Fiji aren't complaining about their lot, but concedes they've had just 1 training session together as a full team before tomorrow night's match.
We got 3 players out of MIQ on Wednesday, 1 starting and the other one's on the bench, so we've only just really got through how's everything, how's your family, and are you great, and then we got a test match in front of you.
Fiji is also being hit hard by a COVID-19 outbreak, with 1,500 new cases and 9 deaths in the last 2 daily updates. Wing Nemani Nandolo says some of the players have had family members die from the virus. Cotter says his players are hurting for their country and they're vowing to do their nation proud tomorrow night.
With what's happening in Fiji, their attention to detail has been outstanding coming into this game. Real focus, and they want to put in a performance, a decent performance. So you'll see some true Fijian grit, some flair and real determination.
The Flying Fijians will wear a special jersey for the test with Vaccinate Fiji written across the chest. While the All Blacks are expecting a stiffer challenge from Fiji than Tonga, that doesn't mean another mismatch is not on the cards. Despite the All Blacks being heavy favourites and predicted to win comfortably, it will still be a special occasion for the Highlanders halfback Aaron Smith of Ngāti Kahungunu and Fielding High School, who will captain the All Blacks for the first time in his 98th test.
It's a great moment for myself and my family. Massive honour that the coaches and the management trust me enough to do the role. You know, I've heard from a few people from my iwi and the Hawke's Bay there and at Kaununu, and it's just very special, and how much it means to my Māori side, to my mother, to our family. There's not much words that can say.
Aaron Smith will also lead the haka in front of his beloved Dunedin crowd.
That's almost all we've got time for this week, but lately we'll be with you, 10 o'clock, with a roundup with all the big stories of the day. Kaua e ware te Aotearoa I a mato kōrero. You can check out all our stories and videos online. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back next week.
Z News headlines at 6:30. 2,500 New Zealanders could be affected by travel delays due to the escalating New South Wales COVID-19 outbreak. Repatriation flights due to leave Sydney tonight have been cancelled, and those rebooked from Tuesday will have to spend 2 weeks in MIQ. The two most seriously injured passengers on a hot air balloon which crashed near Arrowtown this morning remain in a stable condition in Dunedin Hospital. E. coli has been detected in the drinking water in Karitane, one of 3 towns north of Dunedin, still subject to a do not drink notice due to high lead levels. Our next news and weather is at 7.